Ezra, also called Ezra the Scribe and Ezra the Priest in the Book of Ezra. According to the Hebrew Bible, he returned from the Babylonian exile and reintroduced the Torah in Jerusalem. According to First Esdras, a non-canonical Greek translation of the Book of Ezra, he was also a high priest. His name may be an abbreviation of Azaryahu, God helps. In the Greek Septuagint the name is rendered Єздрас, from which Latin, Єздрас. The Book of Ezra describes how he led a group of Judean exiles living in Babylon to their home city of Jerusalem, where he is said to have enforced observance of the Torah and to have cleansed the community of mixed marriages. Ezra, known as Ezra the Scribe in Shazorlic literature, is a highly respected figure in Judaism. In the Hebrew Bible, the canonical Book of Ezra and Book of Nehemiah are the oldest sources for the activity of Ezra, whereas many of the other books ascribed to Ezra are later literary works dependent on the canonical books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Book of Ezra and Nehemiah. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one scroll. Later the Jews divided this scroll and called it First and Second Ezra. Modern Hebrew Bibles call the two books Ezra and Nehemiah, as do other modern Bible translations. A few parts of the Book of Ezra were written in Aramaic, and the majority in Hebrew, Ezra himself being skilled in both languages. Ezra, a descendant of Azaryahu the high priest, was living in Babylon when in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, the king sent him to Jerusalem to teach the laws of God to any who did not know them. Ezra led a large body of exiles back to Jerusalem, where he discovered that Jewish men had been marrying non-Jewish women. He tore his garments in despair and confessed the sins of Israel before God, then braved the opposition of some of his own countrymen to purify the community by enforcing the dissolution of the sinful marriages. Some years later Artaxerxes sent Nehemiah to Jerusalem as governor with the task of rebuilding the city walls. Once this task was completed, Nehemiah had Ezra read the law of Moses to the assembled Israelites, and the people and priests entered into a covenant to keep the law and separate themselves from all other peoples. In later Second Temple period literature, 1 Esdras, probably from the late 2nd/early 1st centuries BCE, preserves a Greek text of Ezra and a part of Nehemiah distinctly different from that of Ezra. Nehemiah in particular, it eliminates Nehemiah from the story and gives some of his deeds to Ezra, as well as telling events in a different order. Scholars are divided on whether it is based on Ezra and Nehemiah, or reflects an earlier literary stage before the combination of Ezra and Nehemiah accounts. Josephus, the 1st-century Jewish historian, Josephus, deals with Ezra in his Antiquities of the Jews. He preferred 1 Esdras over the canonical ɛzrə Nehemiah and placed Ezra as a contemporary of Xerxes son of Darius, rather than of Artaxerxes. The apocalyptic Ezra traditions. The apocalyptic 4th book of Ezra was written c. AD 100, probably in Hebrew Aramaic. It was one of the most important sources for Jewish theology at the end of the 1st century. In this book, Ezra has a 7-part prophetic revelation, converses with an angel or God 3 times and has 4 visions. Ezra, 30 years into the Babylonian exile, recounts the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of Solomon's temple. This would place these revelations in the year 557 BC, a full century before the date given in the canonical Ezra. The central theological themes are the question of theodicy, God's justness in the face of the triumph of the heathens over the pious, the course of world history in terms of the teaching of the 4 kingdoms, the function of the law, the eschatological judgment, the appearance on earth of the heavenly Jerusalem, the messianic period, at the end of which the Messiah will die, the end of this world and the coming of the next, and the last judgment. Ezra restores the law that was destroyed with the burning of the temple in Jerusalem. He dictates 24 books for the public and another 70 for the wise alone. At the end, he is taken up to heaven like Enoch and Elijah. Ezra is seen as a new Moses in this book. There is also another work, thought to be influenced by this one, known as the Greek Apocalypse of Ezra. Ezra in rabbinic literature. Traditionally, Judaism credits Ezra with establishing the Great Assembly of Scholars and Prophets, the forerunner of the Sanhedrin, as the authority on matters of religious law. The Great Assembly is credited with establishing numerous features of contemporary traditional Judaism in something like their present form, including Torah reading, the Amidah, and celebration of the Feast of Purim. In rabbinic traditions, Ezra is metaphorically referred to as the flowers that appear on the earth, signifying the springtime in the national history of Judaism. A disciple of Baruch ben Neriah, he favored study of the law over the reconstruction of the temple, and thus, because of his studies, he did not join the first party returning to Jerusalem in the reign of Cyrus. According to another opinion, he did not join the first party so as not to compete, even involuntarily, with Jeshua ben Jozadak for the office of chief priest. According to tradition, Ezra was the writer of the books of Chronicles. There is a slight controversy within rabbinic sources as to whether or not Ezra had served as Kohen Gadol. In the Syrian village of Tedv, a synagogue said to be the place where Ezra stopped over has been venerated by Jews for centuries. Another tradition locates his tomb near Basra, Iraq. Ezra in Christian traditions, early Christian writers occasionally cited Ezra as author of the apocalyptic books attributed to him. Clement of Alexandria in his Strometer referred to Ezra as an example of prophetic inspiration, quoting a section from 2 Esdras. Ezra in Islam he is known as Azaryahu. He was mentioned in the Quran. Although he was not mentioned as one of the prophets of Islam, he is considered as one of them by some Muslim scholars, based on Islamic traditions. His tomb at Al-Azhar on the banks of the Tigris near Basra, Iraq, is a pilgrimage site for the local Marsh Arabs. Many Islamic scholars and modern Western academics do not view Azar as Ezra. For example, Professor Gordon Darnell Newby associates Azar with Enoch and Metatron. On this, Timothy Winter and Gordon Darnell Newby, too, associate Azar again with Enoch and by extension Metatron, the creator angel or lesser Yahweh. 3. Academic view, Historicity and Genealogy. Mary Joan Winleath in the Oxford History of the Biblical World believes that Ezra was a historical figure whose life was enhanced in the scripture and given a theological build-up. Goster W. Ahlstrom argues the inconsistencies of the biblical tradition are insufficient to say that Ezra, with his central position as the father of Judaism in the Jewish tradition, has been a later literary invention. Those who argue against the historicity of Ezra argue that the presentation style of Ezra as a leader and lawgiver resembles that of Moses. There are also similarities between Ezra the Priest scribe and Nehemiah the secular governor on the one hand and Joshua and Zerubbabel on the other hand. The early 2nd century BCE Jewish author Ben Sira praises Nehemiah, but makes no mention of Ezra. Timeline. Scholars are divided over the chronological sequence of the activities of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. The text does not specify whether the king in the passage refers to Artaxerxes I or to Artaxerxes II. Most scholars hold that Ezra lived during the rule of Artaxerxes I, though some have difficulties with this assumption. Nehemiah and Ezra seem to have no knowledge of each other. Their missions do not overlap, however, in Nehemiah 12. Both are leading processions on the wall as part of the wall dedication ceremony. So, they clearly were contemporaries working together in Jerusalem at the time the wall and the city of Jerusalem was rebuilt, in contrast to the previously stated viewpoint. These difficulties have led many scholars to assume that Ezra arrived in the 7th year of the rule of Artaxerxes II, that is some 50 years after Nehemiah. This assumption would imply that the biblical account is not chronological. The last group of scholars regard the 7th year as a scribal error and hold that the two men were contemporaries. See also, Esdras about the classification of the books ascribed to Ezra, Book of Ezra and Book of Nehemiah the non-rabbinical tradition, Ezra Nehemiah the combination of the above two books, 1 Esdras and 2 Esdras the Greek version of the texts, references. Further reading, Bosman, D. Ezra's Main Age Reform, Israel Redefined. Biblical Theology Bulletin 9, 32 38 doi, 10.1177/0146107979009001005 Bright, John. A History of Israel. Philadelphia, Westminster Press. ISBN A0-664-21381-2. Fensham, F. Charles. The Books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Grand Rapids, Michigan, W.B.O. Edmonds Publishing Company. ISBN A0-8028-2362-9. LaSOR, William Sanford. Hubbard, David Allen. Bush, Frederick William. Old Testament Survey. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Edmonds. ISBN A0-8028-3556-2. Williamson, H. G. M. Ezra and Nehemiah. Sheffield, JSOT for the Society for Old Testament Study. ISBN A1-85075-045-9. External links: Jewish Encyclopedia, Ezra the Scribe, Catholic Encyclopedia, Ėzras.